Hi, everybody. Hi, and welcome. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Libby, and I have Francis here with us in the background. And today we are going to have another exciting conversation with Mercredan. Today we're going to be asking him about sex and sexuality. So if you have any questions on this topic, feel free to pop it in the question box if you're watching live, or if you've got any comments or questions that you'd like us to see for future topics, then please feel free to put it in the comments box below and we'll have a look at it later. If you do enjoy this content, please give it a thumbs up, give it a like, and yeah, that really helps us with the YouTube algorithms and so forth. And yeah, without further ado, let's cross over to Francis and see what Mercredan has to say for us today. Over to you, Francis.
Once again, it is my privilege and pleasure to come and spend these few moments of your time as we settle down into our conversation. So often it is said that spirituality is somehow a separate domain from the rest of one's experience. And yet, in reality, it is an integrated whole. And so, shall we say then, in opening up to the inner pathways requires also opening up the inner workings of one's being. Then, shall we say, there is no option in the pathways of what you would call personal development and spiritual evolution. Enough for us to begin our conversation.
Thank you, Mercredan. Thank you so much for being here with us again today. Today, we would like to talk to you about sex and sexuality beyond the biological. So from a spiritual sense, which you've just told us is not separated from all other. So what advice could you give us on this topic? What insights can we start with?
As we have said, in the beginning, from consciousness delivers the first universal law, the law of paradox, as if there are two separate ways of being that are paradoxically exactly the same, and yet also paradoxically entirely different. Do you understand? So that leads to the second law of polarities that takes its form in the, shall we call it, experiential world as gender differentiation. And so there is, shall we say, a commonality between the genders, and there is paradoxically quite the opposite thing. Let us try to unpack this a little. It is always expressed, in other words, every nuance is expressed from the, shall we say, the intellectual. It is little beyond that, but in the intellectual framework, what one's blueprint is. It comes through how one is enticed into the physical demonstration. So shall we say, whether you like it or not, the feminine is always able to be receptive and creative. And whether they like it or not, the masculine will always be, shall we say, delivering, that is assertive and having to donate. So shall we say a new life is created from that interaction. All sorts of ideas have been thrown into the pot, as it were, almost as if it is trying to deny the realities. And so, we say the nature of these two beings is always to interact in that fashion. So in terms of sexuality, that, shall we say, there is the physical operation. You understand? There is the physical operation. And if it is, shall we say, carried to its highest degree, then the feminine will be receptive. Do you understand? The body has to open up if it wishes to engage. As does the masculine have to, shall we say, become assertive, that is, has to become erect and dominant in order to complete the physical operation. And internally, of course, the same is needed to happen. If there is no emotional, so we say, receptivity, if one is not in the willing phase, then there will be an internal blockage. The masculine also has to take on that as the responsibility. In other words, until the feminine is capable of releasing. In order to release anything, one has to be in, shall we say, a position of safety. So in terms of this sexuality, there has to be, shall we say, a protective zone, a boundary in which the other can relax. Do you follow what I'm talking about? So that is at an emotional level. At the higher levels again, all of this remains the reality. And yet, because of separation, there is always a battle for the control factor. And in reality, nothing proceeds until control is released. Does this make some form of sense?
It does, thank you.
Next question.
Okay, thanks. So I'm just looking for a little bit more guidance around the spiritual side of things rather than the biological or physical. Is there something that happens between the two parties from a spiritual perspective?
As we have always pointed out, from the cosmic, if you like, from the consciousness potential, there is no separation. So, shall we say, when consciousness interacts with itself, it first of all has to understand its own paradox. That is, in order for two beings to interact, two beings, first of all, have to be separated, even though there is no separation. So, shall we say, one is playing with oneself. One is opening to oneself. One is allowing oneself to penetrate with oneself. Do you follow what I'm getting at? So while there is a notion that is an intellectual separation, then one is, shall we say, bound into the physical, biological world of experience. If, however, one lets go of that notion of control, there is, shall we call it, an explosion in consciousness. And the separations are no longer validated. And one is taken into a world of consciousness which is possible, not always maintained, not always recognized. Do you follow what I mean? So there is this sudden letting go of selfhood. Then in the letting go of selfhood, there is a unification of separation. The paradox then is resolved, and consciousness is reintegrated. Do you follow what I mean? So it is not an intellectual set of understandings and so forth. It is not an emotional experience of loving or any of those things. It is so beyond it all, because consciousness is revealed. One will then return into the separate forms, but there is no separation between them for the period, at least, of time as one recognizes what occurred. Does this make sense of your personal experience?
It does. It does.
And you understand then, so beyond all of that, as humans descended into physicality, it came with many notions. The notions that there was something wrong with the separation. You understand, as I have previously commented, the original sin is separation. But the original separation was between man and woman and domination. So then stories, if you like, the mythology that followed on from that was related into sexuality and so on. It was, shall we say, carried forward and created deeper and deeper levels of resistance on the inside. Then individual people started to discover themselves and feel as if they were indeed the holder of the evil force, because that is a difficult concept. Then blame and resentment and so forth emerged, and that caused even more difficulties in something that is the doorway to reintegration. So much of the challenge problems that exist in the world in the moment come back to this separation and one's inability to accept what is the natural form. So over, shall we say, periods of human evolution, a trail of resentments and angers and so on lies as remnants that have to be reintegrated in the resonance of lifetimes. So much that has been, shall we say, cast as evil and of that is not of the good, has now to be experienced in order to be brought into the balanced field. All of this cannot be separated from one's fields of influence. In other words, as I spoke, there are integrated, nested fields of influence, whether that is what is left from the religious ideals, from the social structures, from family and community acceptance and rejections. All of this is playing out on the individual. So each individual always has to meet self. Once one has recognized that the sex and the sexuality are gifts of the divine, they are the divine in action in ways that are accessible to every individual, then one is capable of acknowledging oneself. That is, to take it on board and to experience what that gift is, on which side of the polar balance it lies. Because so much blame has been projected out onto the other that has taken form, shall we say, as demons of civilization. They are thought forms that operate within the fields of influence that create upsets and dissatisfactions and so forth. Do you understand what I am talking about? How the very nature of discontent and anger and resentment play out in the wider field of influence that creates the wars that destroy social structures.
So what advice could you give to people that are, I guess, probably for lack of a better word, victims of these thought forms or religions or beliefs or ideas, attitudes?
When one acknowledges self, you understand, if one becomes one with oneself, then one can take on what is it truly to be masculine, what is it truly to be feminine, how can I express this as my primary concern, what will I need in order to manifest this and therefore attract to myself that which is able to make me whole. Do you understand? So when that occurs, it becomes clear, first of all, that there is a natural harmony. There is a sense of belonging. There is a sense that one can be who one is. Do you understand? The fulfillment then will take place at the physical level, and by that becomes connected at the emotional level, builds a operating conception at the intellectual level of a unity, a unified field of influence. And as such, moments of activity, the operation at the physical level, simply opens the door to the spiritual reality of consciousness. So it is always to acknowledge what is. You are not in reality a physical being at all. As we have pointed out, you're creating this entire novel. You are the authority, the author, and the creator of your storyline. And if you are going to be the hero or the heroine, then dive in and be it. Do you follow what I'm saying?
I do. Thank you.
You understand, for shall we say, the masculine mind, the storyline is more assertive, more dynamic, more activity oriented. And the feminine is more romantic, more subtle. Do you follow? Then the story is one of intrigue, whereas the masculine is the story of courage. Do you follow? Just the natural thing.
Yeah, interesting.
So shall we say, once you acknowledge this in yourself, what is your own predilection to this? Is it that you are going to be romantic? Or is it the intrigue? Do you understand? Is it the subtle nature of human interactions? Do you follow? Are you the heroic rescuer? Is it an escape story? Do you understand? These are all quality models. So when one is writing the story, shall we say, if one chooses a romantic wanting to be the, shall we say, the subject of the romantic storyline, one has to be that. You will not draw out of another the romantic sense until you become the subject, until you find it in yourselves. Is it possible? Does this make sense in a practical way?
Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to add today before we wrap up?
I want to say, look at the world. So many people are incapable of having that response. They have shut off their sexuality. And as a result, the spiritual opportunity remains always at a distance because you are whole. Nothing can be excluded and you'll be spiritual. Do you understand? History is filled with such concepts. Is that enough for today?
It is. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, everybody who's still with us. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you enjoyed the content, then please do give us a like. Delane will be back in 4 days, or 3 days' time, to talk to Mercredan about the fields of influence and how we can gain more awareness around what the fields of influence are, or our fields of influence, and how we can then benefit ourselves from that. In the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful day, rest of day, evening, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye.